7 Seas G-Era. At the end of G-Era, we had access to a phenomenal strike such as Twilight Night Rose, what basically Love by the 7 Seas does, but just better. It also has the Night Rose name, which will utilize Night Rose support, such as Negro Bone and also Bail the Ghosty, and having access to more additional crit. Furthermore, you can utilize the Break Ride on a Negrosanger turn to help build your field with power-up units, and then your Negrosanger can actually extend more attacks that way, reviving cards such as like Columbar or even Nightstorm. And you could also utilize 7C support such as Plagiatin, but also Slash Shade, where Slash Shade can give you the extra attack regardless of which stride you're on, as long as you have a 7C's heart. This can come up in the early game too, since it's not Generation Break Lock. This actually came up in multiple games in the G tourney that I faced, especially some decks that stayed at grade 2 or grade 1 an extra turn. So having access to cards that have skills right away to be super beneficial for this deck at least. Check out Dueling Guard's deck boxes, playmats, and binders. The great quality products that are anime based. They continually have more anime options becoming available. Use the affiliated link in the description for a 5% discount on your next purchase. Starting with the grade 3s, we have 4 Night Mist Break Ride. So essentially you want to make sure you ride this and then immediately stride, and then the following turn you may have the opportunity to do the Break Ride shenanigans. You can revive 2 Negro Rooks, ideally to make them 21k beaters. Again, G-Era only has 10k shields for triggers and 5k shields for grade 1s and grade 2s, and the G-Guards can only get so big too, so it really demands a lot of shield up front with that first and second attack. And then when your Vanguard attacks, if you have Negrosanger, you can have a Slash Shade and also further extend with Negrosanger's skill on top of that. What's also cool is that 7 Seas has another grade 3 such as Plagiatin. So basically on place you're able to revive something immediately and it's retired at the end of the turn. This is super helpful because you can revive Rough Seas Banshee, you can revive combo pieces such as Columbard or even Negrook immediately at that point too. This can also help with the drop zone skill that you can pay 2 counterblasts to ride from the drop zone as long as you have a grade 2 or greater 7 Seas Vanguard. So this helps prevent grade stuck as well, but you can trigger the Break Ride that way if you don't have a grade 3 in hand, or you just have sufficient cards to pay for the cost of stride and you can afford to pay extra counterblast to do this as well. So this skill is valuable in that sense, and so that's why we played with 2. Hindsight, looking with the G tourney how it played out, I think I might go to a 3-3 ratio just because Plagiatin in some games I actually chose to ride it to get the immediate revive, and I feel like that came up a lot more often than it should have, but thank God that I actually had the copy of Plagiatin to do so. So that's why I would maybe do a 3-3 ratio moving forward. 1 copy of Nightstorm. Nightstorm is generic, so literally you can put it in any Granblue variant and you have access to an attack extender, and that's all he is. This is also a hollow target for Negrabone, so you can chain Negrabone into Nightstorm if you want to get more attacks that way too. The Zombie Whale. So this is kind of like the Skull Dragon of back in G-Era. So this literally gets 1k for every 2 cards. So it's like backwards. So it slowly gets bigger compared to Skull Dragon, but ideally this is going to eventually get bigger than Negrook. Negrook by himself is 16k. This can easily hit the 21k mark at that point, mid to late game. And then in certain instances, if you have a booster, you can hit over nice numbers such as like 31k. This is also a hollow target, so Negrabone can also revive it. And this is technically a 12k base. It loses 3k power if you have less than 5 cards in the drop zone, but most cases that's not a big deal. So if you feel like a matchup, maybe Time Leap, for example, where you rather be a 12k base, you can ride this and stay on it. The only downfall is that you're not 7 Cs, and then whatever you stride will give you the name, and more times than not, you'll be riding Night Rose to at least have access to Night Rose's powerful revival skill and crit, but also use the Night Rose support that you have in this deck too. So be mindful of that. Onto the grade 2. So speaking of Negrook, we're playing 4 copies of this bad boy. So this also comes up with Megiddo turns that if they ever do come up, you have a lot of beaters that you can revive. So just having more of like Negrook and also the Whale just is ideal. Almost as similar as like today's sort of modern age of 4 Skull Dragons with Megiddo type of play, right? But again, this is G-Era, so mini Megiddo turns, I guess, in a way. But this is a card that we can constantly revive back and be a constant annoyance to our opponent, being 16k in its nature. Your opponent has to drop a minimal of 2 cards if they're just grade 1s and grade 2s, but forces out those trigger shields right off the back if they have them too. This makes it a lot harder for them to guard against your Vanguard, especially if you get crit, so they have to hold on to a PG or maybe a G-Guard play, and then who knows what you'll get on your drive checks that you can further stack onto another G-Guard that can still attack as well. This also can be revived with Negrabone and Columbard and Nightstorm too, so you have options to easily get this guy into action. Now, we are still technically playing 7Cs, so we have 7Cs in the name, and so 2 copies of Slash Shade is, I think, enough. I found myself having 3 was nice back in earlier G era, but like as we have more support, that's just better. The Counter Blast will essentially give you another attack, and in this case, would you rather spend it on the Slash Shade, an 11k attacker, or would you spend it on Negro Bone to revive Negro Rook, which is a 16k attacker? And so that's where I found myself that in most cases, I'm going to see at least 1 Negro Bone and have access to the Night Rose name, so then maybe I can dwindle this down to 2 copies. And as soon as you have 1 in the drop, that's all really you need at that point too. There's instances where you do ride 1 and then you so happen to see another one, and all of a sudden now you have a grade 2 7Cs Vanguard that can have 4 attacks thanks to the second copy. It actually came up in 1 or 2 of my games as well in the G30. What's nice about Slash 8 too, it kind of deals with disruption to a certain degree. So for example, if you do set up like a Night Storm, a Negrabone, or a Columbard, more than likely on your first or second attack, they're going to pop it with something, whether it be a Cannoneer or even Header Around, for example, and just ruin your multi-attack strategy at that point too. Especially if your Vanguard doesn't revive during the battle phase, especially if you use like Twilight or Tempest, you really don't have much pressure in terms of attack after that if they do that to you. So Slash 8 comes in where you could retire a grade 1 or greater unit and then call it as a new attacker. So if they do that against you, you still can use that Counter Blast to get you the other attack, so your turn is not as lackluster. 2 copies of our boy Columbard, so he's a generic on-call boosting unit type of deal. You're gonna revive the Whale, you're gonna revive Negarook, and other key pieces that you may need. You can even bounce this with Night Storm as well to further attack extend if you want to do that route too. What's really nice about Granblue, especially in G era, because most decks are kind of locked behind Generation Break, you can call your grade 1s and your grade 2s, and if they get retired by something or even they are attacked, you'll just get them back. And so even if you call this on turn 2 as a rear guard and it gets destroyed at by the next turn, you could just revive it back with a main phase skill that will revive 2 or 3 units anyway. And then you can go from there. 1 Cannoneer, and so in this case, we do not have like a Negro Lily Night Rose type of play during our opponent's turn. So this is purely just to have a way to retire units that are annoying, such as Honolly or other cards that could proceed like as a beat beater. For example, Angel Feather has like Broken Heart too as well, so you could pop valuable units like that, and then you'll get the draw on top of that. So if you have the extra Counter Blast, I have always considered Cannoneer as like this will give me advantage, but also get rid of something on my opponent's side, and in that way, it's kind of like a net +2 where I get 1 and they lose 1 type of deal. The last grade 2 that we're playing, we are playing King Serpent. So this is really useful because 7Cs has the synergy where you can break ride or you can ride Plagiatin that does the on-place or on-ride revival, essentially. You can use cards like King Serpent to immediately countercharge and soul charge as well. This is one, if you don't have any CB left, this is a way to refund you immediately, and then you can stride into whatever stride you're going into. The other thing too is that since it soul charges, you can constantly do a main phase revival. Put this in the back of the Vanguard because the Vanguard typically doesn't need a booster, and this will slowly get more pieces into your soul, and as a byproduct, you're going to soul blast them out, and then there are pieces to revive later on too. This is a way to further dig into your deck for those pieces too. So King Serpent overall, big picture, does a lot. Just really helpful in the resource management as well. And because we are playing Cutlass too, Feel for the Soul is more important too, because you are soul blasting 2 to draw a card. So that can easily be used up. And then if you have Jiggers such as Negronora and Negro Mode that also soul blasts, you want to make sure that you're in good hands. Onto the grade 1s, we are playing 4 copies of Water Spout Djinn. In this era, we value the counter charge as well, especially since most of the time you're not going to PG your rearguards. This helps a lot because you're not so heavily reliant on Grenache. Yes, we're playing King Serpent, but just having an extra counter charger helps in that regard too. The one thing that I would change moving forward is I would reduce this to 3 and put in a regular Gush Djinn type of PG, where we would have access thanks to Negronora reviving a PG from the drop and being able to perfect guard if needed. This actually came up in one of my 2 games where like, man, I really wish I had a Gush Djinn in my drop where I can use Negronora to save my butt, basically, at that point. So moving forward, I would reduce this to 3. You could also write this as a grade 1 Vanguard too, especially if you're gonna put Peter behind you. So Peter, you don't use him till like turn 2, so you'll have a booster anyway. And so you can still attack with the booster and still hit over if you're going second on your turn 1, essentially. And then eventually you'll soul blast this out with Cutlass and other cards like that, and then now you have a Djinn in the drop immediately, so you can countercharge the next time you PG already. 3 copies of Time of the Ghosties. You're still Granblue, but you don't want to use 2 cards to pitch the stride every single time. So having 1 card to pitch the stride is super helpful. We don't play any Night Roses in the main deck, so there's no way to search for that, so that skill is not null and void, essentially. But just having to be able to stride, and especially if you use your grade 3s to break ride, you're still going to need another card to stride, essentially. So that helps with that gap. To add more draw power and also early game pressure, we have Cutlass. So Soul Blast 2, draw 1 card. That's all it does. So cards like Rough Seas is important to be able to build up Soul early on and then eventually King Serpent and etc. But you can also call this and make a column with Grenache too, or a 5k trigger like a 7 Seas or even a Rough Seas and then use Rough Seas later on to go into Soul and make essentially 9k or 10k columns while you're at grade 1 or grade 2 essentially. This applies a lot of pressure, and then if they attack the Cutlass, then it's like you already got a +1 from it anyway. And then also, depending on what you draw into, it might be a grade 2 or another grade 1 that you can immediately call. And now you have an L-shaped form to apply that pressure early on as well. Now for Night Rose support, we have 3 copies of Negrabone. So when you're on Twilight Night Rose, you have both names for 7 Seas and Night Rose. So you can use Slash Shade, you can use Negrabone, all in the same turn, which is pretty nuts if you think about it too. And you'll be reviving cards with Hollow. So this will be like Night Storm, Negaruk, the Whale, for example. And it's super helpful because it's just, you know, extending more attacks in that regard. It's also a booster, so it makes room and flexibility to call whatever you need in the front row. It can be anything, and you can make your fields a little more threatening with big beaters and stuff like that too. And as long as you boost with that, you're able to guarantee another attack that you can chain. This is a great booster you can call immediately turn 1, and he just chills for there until you get into the stride game, and he's still alive. He literally just needs to be on the field to be able to boost, and that's it. He does not need to be revived that turn. He doesn't need to be hollowed or anything crazy like that. A really flexible card overall. Our boy Bale the Ghosty. So besides with that fantastic face look that he has, he actually gives us another form of countercharging. So what I noticed too is that when you have Negrabone and you have something to retire in front of it, you can make use of Bale. Bale becomes a 9k as well, so he's almost like the grade 2 that he would have been. Essentially be boosted by Negrabone anyway, but you'll get the counterblast immediately. This also will bottom deck itself, so it kind of helps with the deck size, but you're not really shuffling a lot in this deck too. You're milling into an extent and you're drawing. So Bale will chill for the bottom of the deck for most of your game, if not at all. And this just gives you another unit to be able to countercharge and still apply that pressure too. Onto the grade 0. So in the main deck, we are playing 1 copy of Grenache. This is our main form of countercharging that we can rely on. If you really think about it, our main phase revival is CB1. And then if you want to extend another attack, that's another CB. So that's already 2 CB. So Grenache can refund that. And if you do further extend, now you're going to rely on other cards like Bale, the Water Spout Jin to Perfect Guard, and then King Serpent to also help with that additional counter charge essentially. So Grenache is really good, but he needs extra help, if you know what I mean. And that's the point of a crew. But our starter in this case is Peter the Ghosty. So the reason with Peter the Ghosty is because Granblue has that slow start problem that we have to mitigate no matter what. And in this case, Peter really helps a lot because we are playing cards such as like Cutlass too, because this will go into Soul while milling 2 and drawing you a card at the same time. So you're able to really maximize in that early game. And then also if you need to do it later on, you could use a Peter again if you revive it essentially and then do it again at that point. So it's just a nice flexible starter that can really get Granblue going. We're playing 4 copies of Rampage State. Again, we're playing on Night Rose, so you can easily put those onto the Vanguard and actually go into Soul. You can make boosters if need to be. It's just another card that can go into Soul. And as you're milling, especially in GR, you realize you're blind milling most of the time. So if you're milling triggers, they're like, man, that sucks, you know, right? Kind of feeling. But if you mill cards like this, you can revive them later on and then they go into Soul and they draw you a card. So effect triggers is really helpful. And probably the best one, especially in most Granblue builds, is Rough Seas Banshee, because this is a main phase, go into Soul, draw a card. So you can really actually maximize on cards like Tempest. You need a massive Soul to be able to revive. And if you open up with 1 or 2 or 3 of these, you're really set up well for that turn. And then what's really cool is that you just call these back anyway, because they're targets at that point. And you can set up like maybe 1 or 2 cards that will stay on the field, and then these will go into Soul again. But guess what? You draw an additional card for each copy that you have too, on top of that already, which is really nuts if you think about it. This is a great booster too early game if you want to make numbers such as 9k and 10k and apply that pressure against your opponent too. Especially if they have a 10k base Vanguard, such as like Chronojet, they have the Party Dragon that's a 10k as well. So you may need a booster. And if you're using Peter the Ghosty already, then you can just call something like this and then shove it into Soul the next turn. You have the 7 Seas crit, so we just want to add more crits because Mick the Ghosty is that one. There's other effect triggers, but they don't really come up. Like Cody the Ghosty is a good option that you want. Really, it's there just to have as a body if needed, but in this build, it really doesn't capitalize on that. Maybe in a Night Rose build, so I just went with normal crits, and they're also 5k base, so you do make numbers. So if you call 9k with this in the back row, your opponent is forced to drop 10k. if they're on grade 2 or less. So it makes it really hard for them to like deal with that. And then at that point, they take the damage or have to drop more cards to even guard with that. Then, like I said, we only have one Mick the Ghosty because it is at 1. So he comes up here and there. If I do see him early on, I maybe consider him making an effort to beef something up and then he'll go back into the deck. What I found myself though is that I realized if I have other pieces that just make better plays, then I still prioritize those, and Mick just kind of chills in the graveyard, or in the drop zone, I should say. When he does go back, he goes back at that point. There's some times where if your attack patterns are really nice, where you have a Negrook and a Negrook attack, and then your Vanguard swings and you use Slash 8 to kill one of them, if you get a stand trigger, you can stand the other Negrook still, and now you have the additional attack as well. So the attack patterns still work out, especially if you know you still have Mick in your deck and you know that it's coming soon. That could be a strategy that you rely on for that turn. We have 4 copies of Dueling the Ghosty, so this is one of the benefits that it was too late in G era, essentially, that Granblue did not get this pretty much. But thanks to revisiting G era as a legacy format, now you can play these, and these are super helpful. Not only you're G-girding to live and do other plays, but you can countercharge, which is gonna happen 9 times out of 10. But if you do need the soul charge, you can, and sometimes it does come up, but more than likely you're going to countercharge. And it's a Ghosty. Look at him, he's pretty cute. Looks like he's ready for Halloween in Sleepy Hollow style. He has this little lantern too, you know? Phenomenal card. I'm just grateful that I can actually play him in like G era. All right, onto the bread and butter, the G zone. And so we have Twilight Night Rose. So I've been talking about her, but essentially she can revive cards that are +1 to the number of G zone cards face ups. So like, for example, if this is your first strike, you'll flip something and now +1, that is 2. So you can revive 2 cards. After that, you'll be able to revive 3 or more, depending on how many cards you have face up. And if you do 3 or more revivals, you're going to get crit for the rest of the turn. The other skill that, you know, gives power to units, depending on the Night Rose copies you have in the drop. We don't have any Night Rose, so that doesn't come up. But this is really better than Loved by the 7 Seas at this point in time. I don't even play Loved by the 7 Seas. You could consider still playing 1, but I just felt like it wasn't needed at that point. 2 Tempest, calling Pirate King Gauche. And so Gauche is phenomenal because if you have a bunch of Rough Seas in the Soul and you've accumulated just Soul in general, this will be a main phase revival skill that fills board and then gives you advantage. You will still be only with 7 Seas in the name. So I've done misplays before where I assumed that I was a Night Rose, but it was on Gauche, and I can't use Negrabone in that same turn. So that, you know, be conscious of that. If you don't have a Negrabone at that point, then it's okay. Also, if you have Rampage crits, you can't use those the same turn because, again, you're a 7 Seas Vanguard Heart, so be mindful of that. 2 copies of Negrosonger. So this card is kind of like our winning image turn. You break right, you go into this, you have a perfect field setup, boom, boom. Attack with Vanguard, you can introduce a Slash 8 in the mix, and then whatever you call can be like a Night Storm or a Columbar to further attack extend, and then just be able to do so many attacks at that point. In G era, just the fact that you can at least do 5 attacks or 4 attacks is a pretty good deck to try out and deal with most decks. But once you start pushing that limit and you can hit numbers on top of that, it's really hard to deal with. It's almost like most decks do like 3 to 4 attacks in G era, and that's it. So if you're doing like 6, 7, 8 attacks, it's almost like you're doing 2 turns against them in the same turn, essentially. And so that's why having a pair of Negrosonger when you need to is vital at that point too. Just in case you're like damaged tonight or you have no real setup, you can Obadiah. I don't think I've Obadiah'd recently for G era at least, and so just having one is nice. If you want to remove him and put like maybe Loved by the 7 Seas, you can. I can see that. Although he's the only stride before GB8 that he doesn't need a counterblast. So just keep in mind that. Then we have the GB8, like I mentioned too. Once you get to that point, this is really good in G era because you call full field, they're all plus 10k, and you can call cards like King Serpent to further like countercharge. You can call cards like Bale, and then you can use cards like Night Storm or Columbard and then Slash 8 in the drop and really extend attacks and then save the boosters where you need to. So you're hitting like numbers that are easily 16k and above. So even if your opponent's at 4th damage or they heal at 6th damage, you can still hit, which is really nuts if you think about it. And then again, if you have a stand trigger that's still in main deck, you can drive check it and then stand another unit just in case, if that wasn't enough, and you can see where the party's going. One of the big plays is Mingito. So this hasn't come up lately, but essentially the play is that if you have a bunch of Negrorooks and zombie whales in the drop, you can call them all, and then they are big beaters, and you'll have 6 attacks pretty easily. You can also have access to Slash Shade because more than likely you'll be on a 7 Seas Vanguard anyway, so you can have that extra 7th attack. Worst case scenario, especially if your Vanguard's like the 6th attack, then you can retire something with Slash Shade, and then you stack the triggers all onto slash 8 at that point too. So the play is there, but did it come up recently? Not yet. 2 Negronora, so this is our biggest shield, and essentially you're able to revive a 10k and a 5k, that makes 30k. This is where I wish that I would have gushed Jin to be able to perfect guard from the drop. I think I've been spoiled in premium Granblue where we have access to bigger shield cards, and it's just like, oh yeah, in G-Era, we only have so many options, so yeah, definitely. This also helps flip more cards face up in the G-Zone, which bumps up Necrosonger's power-up boost that the unit that it calls, and it's also closer to helping call more bigger board for Twilight Narrows, and then also get closer to GBA, which actually does matter. There was a point in the tournament that I had like double heal, and I could double Negronora, but I was still 1 card short to get to GBA as close as possible, like on second stride, which is insane, and that would have been like the game-ending play on top of that too. So Negronora is just good on flipping cards face up to get closer to that GB8 still. The 1 copy of Negro Lily, so it's really good to be able to get more shield, retire some stuff. This is just something that if you can't use the soul, you can use CB. We don't have access to the Negro Lily plate, and that's okay. It is what it is, but I'm playing 7Cs. If you want to play a more top deck, then play Night Rose at that point. Negro mode is another way. This helps you G-Guard before you have any cards face up as well, and then if you feel like you want to preserve like Negronora for later on, this could be like kind of like pseudo shield, and also get something out of the saw. And then you have the corpse, which you actually do appreciate the extra mill too from deck. This deck, sometimes you don't have the fun combo pieces, and just having the extra mill, especially when you G-Guard, actually does help. Let's pretend you're going second. This is your hand. You can ride the PG, pass turn, take a damage, crit, power to Vanguard. Your turn, stand and draw. A couple of things you can do. Since you're going second, there's no need for you to actually stay in grade 1, so you could ride up to grade 2. Or ride slash 8 in this case. Heater skill, into soul, mill 2, and draw 1 card. So Night Storm and Rough Seas. Then immediately Cutlass, Soul Blast 2. You get your PG out already, and draw a card. In this case, it's another Rough Seas. And we'll put it into Soul to draw another card. It's a Brick Ride. You can call King Serpent. You technically have Mick the Ghostly, but if you want to play conservatively, you can attack with this for 15, and then Vanguard will attack, and then you get... Your opponent may try to damage deny you, and they attack the rear guard or something, or maybe they do try to attack you, and you can like intercept the King Serpent anyway. And if they like decide to keep you at that, it could be your turn. Draw for turn. In this case, I'm going to use Plagiaton to revive King Serpent. King Serpent will trigger to Soul Charge and Counter Charge. And then you can either use the grade 3 or Tommy to stride. I'll use Tommy in this case to stride. Have Night Rose there. There's a couple of things you can do. You can use Cutlass, Soul Blast 2, let's say the Whale and Slash Shade. Draw a card. You can call grade 3 attacker and call over the King Serpent. Use Night Rose skill. This will call 2. You can have it like this, and they're all coming as hollow, by the way. King Serpent can trigger again. Soul Charge and Counter Charge again. So you have a couple of things, actually. You could have done different options too. Since we have Slash Shade, you could revive this instead, and then this will trigger another attack at that point. So there's a couple of ways you can do this. In this case, I'll attack for 11. This will be 16. Night Storm triggers. Now we have 6 in the drop. This can attack, triple drive, apply crits whenever, power here. This will attack, so 12 plus 3 is 15k, with the booster is 20k, and then with any triggers, it'll be over that. And the end of the turn, this dies because of Hollow, this dies because of Night Rose. If your opponent decides to give you some more damage, you gotta heal. Let's say you Perfect Guard, you Counter Charge because you do have another Perfect Guard. You could also G-Guard early on. And let's say you use Negronora to flip something, Soul Blast, Columbar out of the Soul. It's your turn, draw for turn. So these are our cards, so we could actually... I'll pay cost 2 to stride. So you have Twilight Narrows again. You'll be able to Superior Call full board. Let's say these 5 cards. So these are retired. They're all hollow. You'll get crit to your Vanguard. Soul Charge, Counter Charge, Rough Seas, draw a card. Oh, we got the Negro Bone. That was pure luck. We got some interesting combo plays. Okay, I assumed that we didn't have it, but now we do. So we have some options. So in the drop, we have the Zombie Well. In hindsight, instead of discarding the Perfect Guard, just do the second Negrook at that point. Yeah, so that way you have more Negrooks. I was debating to go into Negrosonger, so I was going to call the Negrook from hand, but decided to do Twilight. So this will be a better field setup. 5 plus 12 is 17, so the Whale is about 17 by himself. So he's not any like significant numbers. So the first attack can be the Negrook for 16. Then the Columbar can attack and boost it to make another 16k as well. I'll just keep calling Negrook. Just to make it easier, and hollow it, of course. Then you can use Negrobone, boosted it to make a 23k column. This will also retire it, and then you could also call the same Negrook. That's a key tip. So if you don't have extras, you can retire it and immediately call it back. Now, depending on what you have left here, we do have a Slash Shade, so we do have the 7 Seas name. If your opponent is still 11k, instead of the Nega Rook, you can actually revive Nightstorm. So let's do that. Let's assume they're still 11k. So Nightstorm will swing for 11k poke, and then use Counterblast to revive a Nega Rook at the other side of that. And then now you can attack with your Vanguard and use the CB to use Slash Shade, retire the Nightstorm. You could also retire this, but everything was revived by Nairo, so it's gonna die anyway. So you put it here anyway, and then your drive checks could be a crit, and then a heal. If you had a stand trigger, you could essentially restand a booster, and if you had additional CB, you can actually use Bone again. It is not once per turn, which is pretty nuts. So keep in mind that, just having those options. And then of course, since we didn't get any stands, this is what you have to work with. This could be 11 with any triggers, and this will be 16 with any triggers. So we did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 attacks at that point. This in itself can be a finishing turn too. And that's the deck profile. I hope you guys enjoyed it. This is really cool with 7 Seas being able to play it again in G-Era with like full Granblue support. The fact that Twilight, Night Rose, and also Dewy the Ghosty do so much for this deck too is really cool. I may even consider playing Night Rose again in G-Era. So whenever the next tourney is or the next one after that, I may consider to play Night Rose in that format and relive those memories, essentially. If you guys have any questions or even have thoughts or suggestions, feel free to comment down below. I'd love to have a conversation too. And if you want to support the channel, use the affiliated links such as 50 Card Shop, TCG Player, Trading Card Mint, Card Trader Zero, and then of course, improve your anime swag with Dueling Guard's phenomenal products, deck boxes, playmats, binders, and sleeves as well. So till next time, amigos, bye!